The FBI apprehended a man that eluded capture for nearly 2 decades. His homemade letter bombs struck fear across the United States, mostly targeting airlines and universities, earning him the nickname the UNABOMBER. All told, he killed 3 people and injured 23 more. He took great care not to leave a trace of evidence, and unlike other serial murderers, he didn't seek glory and fame for his killings. If it wasn't for his Manifesto, the publication that outlined his disdain of technology in modern society, he may never have been caught. After his arrest, the world was shocked that this backwards-living hermit living without electricity or running water could be the man responsible for such sophisticated killings. Today, we explore this man, the domestic terrorist and lone wolf killer. 3 more.
Niye? Peki hadi eyvallah. Evet. Give me a good one. Give me a good Ted Kaczynski one.
The FBI apprehended a man that eluded capture for nearly 2 decades. His homemade letter bombs struck fear across the United States, mostly targeting airlines and universities, earning him the nickname the UNABOMBER. All told, he killed 3 people and injured 23 more. He took great care not to leave a trace of evidence, and unlike other serial murderers, he didn't seek glory and fame for his killings. If it wasn't for his Manifesto, the publication that outlined his disdain of technology in modern society, he may never have been caught. After his arrest, the world was shocked that this backwards-living hermit living without electricity or running water could be the man responsible for such sophisticated killings. Today, we explore this man, the domestic terrorist and lone wolf killer, Ted Kaczynski.
I want to know, people thought he was crazy because he was Polish. Yeah. I mean, I understand the disdain someone has for technology, like a Polish person has for technology, because I've heard a lot of, like, how many Poles does it take to screw on a light bulb jokes. You know what I mean? So, like, obviously, a lot of you guys are shitting on the man because he's Polish, and that's unacceptable. Okay? Kind of fucked up. I shit on him because he wrote a manifesto, and I hate that. Okay, only one guy is allowed, or 2 guys are allowed to write manifestos. Okay, maybe like a couple, but unless you are like directly writing a manifesto, what is this? Is this better? Was the Unabomber real stories? There are so many fucking channels like this. I want one that talks about MK Ultra. Okay. And I don't know if any of these are actually going to talk about MK Ultra. On a video, but this does? No, I'm not. No. We need a video. We're not going to fucking read, dude. What's next? This explains his philosophy and his history and mentions MK Ultra.
The last few years have seen great advances in terms of environmental thought and anarchical sentiment. The increasingly apparent impact of industrial society on the climate, as well as the elitist and incompetent process of liberal democracy, has left many in a state of despair, frustration, and rage. The solutions, either too drastic or too naive, rarely catch on. What are we to do as we face a world of increasing hopelessness? For one man, the answer was clear. Send bombs through the mail from your cabin in Montana. This is the philosophy of the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski.
But first, a word from our sponsor. I do find that funny. I mean, this is exactly what Ted Kaczynski would have hated. You know what I mean? Sponsorships, like the one at the top of the hour when there's a 3-minute ad break. But at least there is a mechanism to avoid those ads at the top of the hour. Of course, you can just subscribe for $5 or for free with a Twitch Prime, or by getting gifted a sub if you're lucky. Do not send mail bombs. Instead, bomb the top of the hour ad break by subscribing. Here's a 3-minute ad break now. Real City, thank you for the 5. Get the subs.
Ted was born on May 22nd, 1942 in Chicago. Born to loving parents, he was nonetheless...
Is there any validity to the MK Ultra stuff? Yes.
...separated from them for a short period due to a hives outbreak. After his isolation in the hospital, Ted would show little emotion. However, he would also express extreme sympathy for animals who were caged. In high school, Ted demonstrated a profound intellect, especially in the area of mathematics. As one classmate remembers, he was never really seen as a person, as an individual personality. He was always regarded as a walking brain, so to speak. This would eventually lead him to Harvard at the age of 16, where he earned a degree in mathematics and finished with a GPA of 3.12. However, at the same time, Ted was constructing a specific worldview that had become increasingly anti-technology. To put his philosophy to the test, he signed up for a series of psychology studies done on Harvard undergrads. Conducted by the psychologist Henry Murray, these studies were used to research the effects of stress on human belief and generally used interrogation techniques that would appear unethical by today's standards. Subjects were told that they would debate personal philosophy and would submit essays on their beliefs and values. Then individuals acting as other students would come in and verbally abuse the subject, telling them that their ideas were ridiculous and illogical. Some have suggested that these studies were part of the CIA's.
Some have suggested? No, it definitely was. What do you mean? It's not like it's not a mere suggestion. I mean, it certainly is. I mean, he was definitely secretly employed by the CIA. For the record, it was not like using debate bros as a torture method. I know. I love that your name is Sophistry of Sam. But yes, using debate bros as a torture method is like next level shit. Imagine watching like political debate, like constantly forcing you to watch fucking political debates on like the most idiotic shit too.
MK Ultra project. Nevertheless, and despite the possible abuse Ted suffered while in Harvard, he argues that
there's only two ways to get out of that. You either become a fucking Twitch streamer who is hated by so many, okay? But still very successful, or you become the Unabomber and nothing in between.
That the experiences there had no significant effect on the course of his life. After Harvard, Ted enrolled in the University of Michigan, where he specialized in geometric function theory. Unfortunately, this subfield was becoming increasingly less popular during the 60s. Ted then became the youngest assistant professor in the history of Berkeley. Still, his passion for mathematics as a career was waning, as evident by students' reports that Ted was a terrible professor who would never answer questions and simply teach straight from the textbook. Ted would resign in 1969. While he was teaching, Ted had his first documented desire for violence. He began to experience intense sexual fantasies that involved him becoming a female. At one point in 1966, he decided...
Oh, dude, here's a conservative angle. Ted Kaczynski was actually trans. He was transed. And that's why he was violent. I'm surprised no one has said that.
...decided to undergo gender transition. However, while in the waiting room, Ted decided against it and wrote in his journal that he had a deep passion to kill the psychiatrist and everyone else that hates him. Feelings of inadequacy...
Dude, I love this music playing in the background while he's talking about, like... he's talking about, like, the bloodlust that Ted Kaczynski had for his psychiatrist, while in the background it's like the kindest, most gentle music playing, like do 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 do.
And loneliness appeared to confound at this stage of his life, resulting in a burning hatred for society itself. Ted built a remote cabin outside of Lincoln, Montana, while receiving money from his parents. His initial goal was to become completely self-reliant, and he spent much of his time studying wilderness survival. However, after discovering that a road had been built in an area of the forest he considered sacred, Ted changed his goal to dismantling industrial society. From 1978 to 1995, Ted would go on to kill 3 people and injure 23 others through mailing a series of bombs. The bombs generally targeted those who he had felt aided the progress of industrial society, such as those who work in the timber industry, genetics, oil.
No fucking shot. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, died today at 81. He was one of America's most brilliant young mathematicians ever, but went mad after being a subject of abusive MKUltra experiments while at Harvard. A lot of people know that, but did you know that before becoming a hermit who mailed bombs to people, Kaczynski also developed gender dysphoria and wanted to become a woman? Oh God, I hate this. I hate it. I fucking hate. I hate every part of this. Okay. It's just like, I don't know what to say about this.
Or
dude.
computer science. The idealism of his actions climaxed when he sent several letters to prominent newspapers, giving them the ultimatum to either publish his manifesto or face further bombings. The newspapers obliged, publishing the more than 30,000-word piece that discusses the evils of technology, the complacency of leftism, and the potential for a new...
I mean, the counter to that quite literally is, yeah, he had gender dysphoria, and then if he had gender dysphoria, he didn't fucking follow through on it, and quite literally hated his psychiatrist for it, and maybe perhaps if he fucking underwent HRT, he wouldn't have become the Unabomber. Like, I guess you could say that, because it's not like he was fucking trans, you know what I mean? Or even if he was, we don't know. Hi, my girlfriend wants to know if you would have sex with her. My answer is no, please. This is something that gets brought up more frequently than you would think in this chat. I don't know what is going on with that. It's not happening.
new future. Fortunately, the
I
idiosyncratic
only fuck your moms, not your girlfriends.
writing led to his sister-in-law and brother identifying the author as Ted. This led to his eventual capture and sentencing, where he is currently serving 8 life sentences. One of Ted's primary influences is that of the Christian anarchist philosopher Jacques Ellul. The main theme in Ellul's work is the idea that modern technology directly threatens human freedom and religion. Ellul believed that movements that have fueled industrial society, such as materialism, scientism, and economics, are simply substitutes or false idols for God. He argues that these ideologies tend to use and abuse their followers in order to continue the necessity of efficiency. This is identified through Ellul's use of the word technique, which he defines as the totality of methods rationally arrived at and having absolute efficiency.
I feel like we should stop watching this because, like, there are too many anarchities in the chat who are going to be like, wait, hold up. This man was cooking a little bit. Like, what was he cooking? I feel like he was cooking something good. Okay? I just, like, this is one of those things where, like, you know, you got hella fucking degrowth Andes in here, which obviously is not the same. There are many different, there's different kinds of, you know, degrowth ways to go about, you know, pushing for degrowth ideology or anything like that. But anyway,
For a given stage of development in every field of human activity, efficiency becomes the unquestionable goal of human existence and, by default, subordinates the natural world. Ellul's major concern is the capacity for this technique to shape the social and psychological makeup of individuals. Firstly, it makes us adapt to technology rather than it adapting to us. Secondly, it shapes our desires around efficiency through a constant need for utility and categorization. This is aided by media and propaganda, which is manipulated by special interest groups and creates an inner control over the individual by a social force, which means that it deprives him of himself. Unlike Ted, however, Ellul does not promote violence as an answer. As he argues, a Christian who chooses violence is sacrificing freedom for necessity. In fact, his definition of anarchy is an absolute rejection of violence, as he sees the nation-state to be the primary source of violence. Ellul advocates for the creation of grassroots institutions, and suggests that a change in perception will help us avoid absolute subordination under technology, specifically through viewing technology as objects or tools, rather than allowing them to shape our desire. Ted's manifesto is similar to Ilul's message, but carries a far more radical solution with it. Notably, the manifesto is aware of its radical tone, accompanied by an annotation that explains that the manifesto contains imprecise and general sweeping statements, and that it should be taken as a crude approximation of reality. It then opens with the Unabomber's own theory of history. He believes that small changes to long-term trends are simply transitory, and that changes large enough to permanently affect a trend can also change society as a whole. However, he suggests the side effects, unwelcome or not, of any large-scale change is entirely unpredictable. Likewise, he argues that new societies cannot be designed, and finally, that people do not choose the form of their own society, a popular rejection of social contract theory. The opening line, "The Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race," conveys the sentiment of the entire piece. Ted specifically argues 3 instances in which technology has degraded humanity. Firstly, it has destabilized society through the erosion of freedom. The system requires the regulation of human behavior in order for it to function. But what is freedom according to him? Freedom means being in control, either as an individual or as a member of a small group, of the life and death issues of one's existence. Food, clothing, shelter, and defense against whatever threats there may be in one's environment. Freedom means having the power to control the circumstances of one's own life. Secondly,
It's like 3 different understandable, desirable, normal, good things, and then like 1,000 fucking idiotic solutions always. This is what no theory does to a motherfucker. I mean, he did. It's not like he didn't read theory. He just, took the wrong, he learned the wrong lessons from it. Which is that the CIA cooked his mental health. I mean, I think so. Like, most of what he's talking about as far as like technological improvements or industrial revolution can be substituted from a immediate materials lens directly and lay the blame directly in the hands of capital owners. Like what he's talking about freedom, what he's talking about when he's talking about freedom, when he's talking about all this other shit, like when he's talking about how like our lives are ruled by the tech that guides us. No, our lives are ruled by our relation to the means of production and commodity production in general. That part is absolutely correct, but he's not saying that. He's looking at an aberration or at least like one like consumer facing part of that and hyper focusing on like the human facing component of commodity production, commodities itself, rather than the way they're produced and how society is designed around the way that they're produced.
According to him, freedom means being in control, either as an individual or as a member of a small group, of the life and death issues of one's existence. Food, clothing, shelter, and defense against whatever threat.
Running water is the problem, not capital. Yeah, it's like looking at a situation and completely avoiding all of the tremendous benefits that technological improvements have delivered on mankind and literally saying, no, I disavow all of that across the board. He uses feminism and transgender people in his manifesto to show the degeneracy of society. Yeah, I mean, he was definitely a reactionary. Like, reactionaries can also yearn for freedom. Actually, as a matter of fact, many reactionaries do claim that they are on board with freedom. Literally look to like modern American libertarian movements, and you will see that.
Threats there may be in one's environment. Freedom means having the power to control the circumstances of one's own life. Secondly, industrial society has created an unfulfilling life for many. People spend their days engaged in what he calls surrogate activities, such as entertainment consumption, political activism, and science. These are all activities that are in the service of technology rather than humanity, according to Ted. Here he also takes a clear aim at leftists, which he defines as socialists, collectivists, feminists, and gays, who he feels have fallen prey to over-socialization and inferiority. Specifically, he defines over-socialization as the process by which people are trained to think and act.
Dude, when you say he hated capitalism, though, so he for sure was no ANCAP, you, again, forget that, okay, you forget one component here. It's like hating capitalism because capitalism has created a society where, like, diversity is at the forefront because black people buy shit too. They have purchasing power. Gay people have purchasing power. So now you're literally fucking seeing Target do Pride merch, right? It's like a right-wing reactionary hating capitalism, hating free market capitalism, because free market capitalism has created advertisement initiatives that directly target marginalized communities with disposable income. Okay? That does not mean that this person actually fucking hates capitalism, though. In many respects, they love capitalism. It's kind of like he hates it because he thinks all matter of technological improvements have basically enslaved mankind to a state of permanent, like chasing permanent efficiency, permanently chasing efficiency, and our lives are ruled by consumption, and our lives are ruled by not like the natural state, but instead our lives are ruled by consistently growing and I guess industrializing further and chasing technological improvements. Yeah. Now is a good time as any to remind folks that Kaczynski was basically a black-pilled white supremacist and not actually a green anarchist, contrary to popular belief, which is why a lot of, like, cool conservatives online will, those who love, eco-fascism, for example, those people love talking about Kaczynski. He was a theoretical mess. He was the most alienated by the system. All of his worldview consisted in the individual, which is the most reactionary way of understanding social relations. A significant portion of the document is dedicated to discussing left-wing politics, with Kaczynski attributing many of society's issues to leftists. He defines leftists as mainly socialist, collectivist, politically correct types, feminists, gay, and disability activists, animal rights activists, and the like. He believes that over-socialization and feelings of inferiority are primary drivers of leftism. Like, this is Jordan Peterson, dude. And derides it as one of the most widespread manifestations of the craziness of our world. Kaczynski adds that the type of movement he envisions must be anti-leftist and refrain from collaboration with leftists as, in his view, leftism is in the long run inconsistent with wild nature, with human freedom, and with elimination of modern technology, which is hilarious because, oh my God, dude, like, primitive communism exists, and it has existed for a longer period of time than the Industrial Revolution has been around, and our contemporary society and our current understanding of human nature. So it's quite literally the exact opposite. This fucking this is literally the problem with STEM lords who try to, like, get into the world of philosophy, and it's just like there's just a massive blind spot that they have, and they're so fucking up their own asses. Obviously, I'm not saying you guys, because all of you motherfuckers are in here, so clearly you have a better appreciation for social sciences than the average fucking STEM lord. But if you're a STEM lord, you know exactly who the fuck I'm talking about, okay? Like, typical, I know everything because I'm fucking brilliant. I know I'm reducing it to, like, individualism, but once again, but it's like American entitlement, deeply baked into our DNA. American exceptionalism deeply baked into our DNA. Being a fucking STEM lord and thinking you're the fucking smartest dude, and then cooking up this understanding of the world that is also just objectively incorrect. Being able to parse the things Ted was right about and the things he was very fucking wrong about is an important thing. The people who think it's mega based also have not read his manifesto, only his Wikipedia, or perhaps an infographic that had a picture of Ted with the glowing Bitcoin eyes from the Fash Wave meme era, which is par for those guys. Yeah. Least right wing Polish. Kurwa. Kaczynski adds that the type of movement he envisions must be anti-leftist and refrain from collaboration with leftists. He also criticizes conservatives, describing them as fools who whine about the decay of traditional values, yet enthusiastically support technological progress and economic growth, things he argues have led to this decay. Yeah, this was funny. He said, R.I.P. Ted Kaczynski, devastating news. The world just lost one of its last literate Polish people. Americans doing Polish jokes is so funny. I don't know why. It just never gets old for me. I'm sorry. Anyway,
as
let's
a society demands through the experience of guilt. Leftists tend to take part in various activities to alleviate the guilt, such as small-scale reform or advocating for minority groups, without ever considering the serious or drastic measures actually required to solve these issues. The leftist is anti-individualistic, pro-collectivist. He wants society to solve everyone's problems for them, satisfy everyone's needs for them, take care of them. He also takes aim at conservatives who he feels hypocritically.
Like, that's how you can tell when, that's how you can tell about a person's political ideology, their personal political ideology. One, when they tell you that they are anti-leftist and anti-collectivist, okay? And then two, when they tell you that conservatives are in the wrong because they're cucked, they're tech cucks. They're cucked to technology, okay? Like, he's like, conservatives would be in the right if they weren't so cucked to technology.
Whine about the decay of traditional values, yet enthusiastically support technological progress and economic growth. Finally, the manifesto argues that technology has increased psychological suffering. As he explains, people have a basic need that he calls the power process, which has the four ingredients of goal, effort, attainment, and autonomy. However, industrial society disrupts this process by making things either too easy, such as accumulating tech and fashion to feel good, as encouraged by ads, or too difficult, such as making it impossible to control modern issues, such as pollution or the invasion of privacy. Consistent failure to attain goals throughout life results in defeatism, low self-esteem, or depression. Kaczynski's solution is to create stress and instability within society until the whole system collapses. He argues that tapping in
Okay, I'm not gonna shit on anarchists any further. I was gonna say, just typical anarchist activity. Just not all anarchists, okay? Not all anarchists.
Into sub-societies such as ghettos and criminal organizations are crucial in doing this, as they threaten the absolute control of the system. He suggests that revolution should be preferred over reform, as reform is always restrained by the fear of painful consequences if changes go too far. But once a revolutionary fever has taken hold of a society, people are willing to undergo unlimited hardships for the sake of their revolution. His idea of a successful revolution is one in which human society is taken to its pre-industrial state, with only small-scale technology such as water wheels. Factories and technological knowledge should be unilaterally destroyed. He believes that despite suffering caused by such a revolution, it is far more preferable than the other alternatives, either the collapse of the system under its own weight due to overconsumption and environmental disaster, or its continued advancement, which simply involves living a long but empty and purposeless life.
Why are you intrigued by this man? Yet another fucking chatter who normally is like pretty thoughtful and has good commentary. failing to recognize that I'm making fun of Ted Kaczynski and thinks simply by the act of trying to develop a better understanding of his personal philosophy, I must be in support of him in some way. First of all, what is the number one thing I make fun of in this community, okay, other than anarchists? Or what is the number one way that I make fun of anarchists? Take a fucking shower, okay? Ted Kaczynski was absolutely anti-shower. He was so anti-shower, he didn't like running water, okay? Like, you can't be more crusty. You literally cannot be more crusty than a man who straight up says, I am so against showers. I'm the stinkiest motherfucker on the planet. I am the least showered person on the planet. I smell so bad. You can smell me from a mile away. You don't have to be a dog. You don't have to have improved sense of smell to know that I'm coming.
Some, such as Cynthia Ozick, likens Kaczynski to Dostoevsky's Raskolnikov, a philosophical criminal of exceptional intelligence and humanitarian purpose, driven to commit murder out of an uncompromising idealism. Others suggest that the Unabomber was consumed by the outdated notion of the noble savage, the idea that we can somehow return to the life of the frontierman and enjoy an...
Yeah, he clearly wasn't. Because, like, if he was, the outdated notion, if he was, he would not be anti-collectivist. Because, again, you know, for the longest period in history of mankind's existence, we lived in collectivist forms where the commons were used by all, and there was no, you know, there was no structure surrounding like usury or you know, people just like kind of lived, they survived. It's actually unironically the most like Ted Kaczynski style anarcho-primitivist existence that we could live under, but he didn't realize that, I guess.
idyllic natural existence.
Yeah, he was like, I don't want normal monka. I want individualist monka, which is not even a thing.
While ignoring the downsides.
Like when you see individualist monka, that implies that that monkey has been fucking kicked out. In most, I mean, look, I don't know that much about fucking monkeys and shit, but oftentimes, if you see a monkey out in the wild by itself, that means that like they're fucking violent, dangerous. They've been cast aside. They got their ass beat. They're ostracized. You know what I mean? It straight up implies that it's like this dude did something fucked up.
Such a life. Specific critiques have also been launched against the Manifesto. Kaczynski entirely avoids discussing the seemingly innocent positives of technology such as reading glasses, music recordings, and sewers that appear to improve human existence and give some quality to life. Likewise, his argument that modern man has no ability.
Quality of life plus also, like, you know, not dying at the age of 14 because you got a minor cut and had gangrene. Okay? Like, that's not just like a quality of life improvement. That is just straight up part of the reason why we have prospered in the way that we have. Like, being so ableist that you literally think like medicine is wrong. God, I hate disability activists, which is why I think, much like Pol Pot, I have an anti-glasses perspective.
To control pollution and other things outside of his control doesn't really hold up in comparison to the primitive man, who would likewise have many things outside of his control, such as disease and basic security. Ted counters this by stating that the primitive man can handle these issues stoically, but it is not entirely clear.
Yeah, stoically. A bear attack. I'm going to tell the bear about Marcus Aurelius, dude. You know what I mean? I actually, when I'm in the wild and a bear attacks me, I start talking about, I just stoically avoid the bear. Okay. I just, oh, did I just get fucking half of my upper body ripped to shreds by a bear claw, well, guess what? I'm just going to keep walking in a separate direction. I can't control the elements. I can only control how I receive the elements. Okay? I can only control what my reaction is to said elements. So fuck it. I'm just going to assume that this is a simple flesh wound. It's fine.
As to why the modern man can't also accept the problems out of their control stoically. It appears that Ted has an absolutist and perfectionist position here, in which anything considered technological is evil and everything natural is good. Likewise, Ted believes that a coordinated universal shutdown...
Yeah, exactly. The people of Grafton, New Hampshire tried to apply that stoicism to the bear population, and yet the black bear population won, okay? If they can, if only people of Grafton, New Hampshire had explained the non-aggression principle to the black bear population, they wouldn't have been overrun with bears, okay? Or they could go a different direction, which was tried, tested, and true, which was, collectively banding together to have sewage and also trash collection that you pay for so that you weren't overrun with black bears who were just simply looking for and foraging very aggressively for food in town. That's a way to do it. But, dude, it's literally always like all matter of like contemporary libertarian ideology is basically just unironically coming to that exact same conclusion that we had already come to, okay? Which is maybe we need to band together and decide that there are certain services that we must put in place so that we don't get overrun by black bears that are simply foraging for food in town because we don't have trash collection.
Of progress is the only solution. However, this seems incredibly idealistic, especially in contrast to his pessimistic view of humanity. If one country decides to continue progressing in technology, they could quickly dominate the world. Ted appears unwilling to accept the possibility that technological progress is a Pandora's box we simply cannot close. Finally, if Ted truly values autonomy and the freedom of choice, then modern society still allowed him to quit a comfortable academic position and live in the woods. Where industrial society allows varying lifestyles of comfort and freedom, a pre-industrial state may fail to offer a life of security if desired. Perhaps the greatest critique, however, is found in the work of Jacques Ellul, one of Ted's greatest influences. Ted felt it absolutely necessary to kill for the efficiency of his message, but Ellul denounces violence in pursuit of the truth, as doing so simply falls into the same heartless utility that Ted had rejected so fervently. Kaczynski's sadistic and sociopathic disregard for the lives of innocent people should make anyone wary of his idealism. Despite his coherent and prophetic critique of late-stage capitalism, we should not mistake his personal anger towards the system, which
It's literally like falling for the Tucker Carlson narrative, which has been tried time and time again, where he says things that are economically populist and sometimes even anti-capitalist, despite being a pro-capitalist, of course. He loves capitalism, let's be fucking real. But he's only saying that because he hates certain elements of capitalism, like diversity initiatives, okay? Like not allowing WASPs to run the country, or not allowing white land-owning WASPs to run the country. That's it.
Evidently destroyed his soul through isolation and experimentation as worthy philosophical discourse.
Why are chatters looking at one of the most mentally ill people in the last 50 years and assuming that there's going to be consistency or rationality in their ideology? Because I think it's fascinating. For the record, I do personally believe it's fucking fascinating to understand what goes on in the mind of such a psychotic individual. You know what I mean? It's dope, especially now that he died. You know, I love learning more about that kind of shit. But let's get back to the Unabomber, the devastating use of a brilliant mind, and talk about where and what his beginnings were, where he began, what his life was like, and more. now that you learned a little
For
bit
nearly
about
2
his
decades,
philosophy.
A mathematical genius with delusions of single-handedly destroying industrial society. Planted or mailed powerful bombs to...
That's also another ironic moment for him. Like, he was never going to get anything done because he was so hyper individualistic that, like, how are you going to get anything done? Like, it's so self-defeating. The notion that, like, you can spark a permanent violent revolution by leading the way and individually getting other individuals to act individually to do such things is so fucking stupid. How are you going to do that?
Unsuspecting, innocent victims. It was a spree of mayhem.
Hey, Hasan, after this, could you please cover the desexualization of the Asian Indian man? What? I don't even know what the fuck that means, brother. What are you saying?
It killed 3 and wounded over 24. In the largest and most expensive investigation in FBI history, agents spent 17 years hunting for the elusive terrorist known as the UNABOMBER.
Okay, immediately I'm captivated by this because it's like old school like 90s style fucking documentary recreations. I am so on board with this. The editing is fire. At the same time, shows he's writing to, if not to affect other people to organize and destroy society together. No, that would be collective action, my friend, and that's a big no-no. No, he individually hopes that individuals completely on their own will act out their individual desires, not collective action. Well, he also thought that he could manipulate the ghettos, as they were saying, but, you know, and the criminal element, because those are the heretic collectivists.
The first bomb came in the spring of 1978. The damage it caused was minimal, but its impact would be enormous. With each new detonation, the bomber learned a little more about bombs, and law enforcement learned a little more about the man who sent them. Because its targets were universities and airlines, the FBI called him the Unabomber. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former director of the FBI's New York office. Before we ever knew the name Ted Kaczynski, we knew we were dealing with a disgruntled genius. We just didn't know how smart...
Hey, if you care his last name is spelled wrong on your stream, should end with an I, not a Y, not to be that guy. Anyone who says not to be that guy loves to be that guy, okay? Number one. Number two, I don't care. The fact that I got most of the letters right should make me the most supportive of the Polish people, okay? Like, any Polish person that comes in here and says, wow, any Polish person that comes in here and says, I am literally in awe that you got the overwhelming majority of letters right in Ted Kaczynski's Polish last name, is wrong. You have to recognize that I made the effort and I actually succeeded fairly well, okay?
Or how angry he truly was, or how far he'd go. But while the Unabomber was carefully perfecting his bombs, we were refining our profile. It was all a matter of who would finish first.
On May 25th, 1978, an engineering professor named Buckley Christ at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, appeared in the mailroom with a shoebox-sized
Dog, these recreations are about to go brazy.
parcel. Professor Christ was listed as the return addressee, and he didn't know the man it was addressed to.
They got Max Payne soundtrack playing in the background.
Security guard Terry Marker cracked, maybe it's a bomb. As bombs go, it wasn't much of one. It began a 20-year streak of violence that would stump the FBI and terrorize the nation. On November 15, 1979, American Airlines Flight 444 took off from Chicago, bound for Washington, D.C. As the Boeing 727 reached cruising altitude, the cabin filled with smoke. It was pandemonium. The plane was diverted to Dulles Airport in Virginia. A dozen people were treated for smoke inhalation. But for a faulty wire in the bomb, over 100 people would have been killed.
This guy sucked at building bombs at first, which, you know, I guess the lesson there is like never give up, you know what I mean, on your dreams especially. And eventually you'll get better. For every one victory, there's 1,000 failures that preceded it, you know what I mean? It's just, you know, there's always lessons to learn, you know, improvements. Practice makes perfect. This is truly an inspiring story.
Bombing an
Yeah.
airliner is a federal offense. The FBI was called in. FBI agent Chris Ronay examined the evidence of the airline bomb.
It essentially was a wooden box that looked to be hand fashioned, handmade. We found that it contained a barometric switch and some other initiating components, batteries, wires, and a container for the explosive charge. The barometric switch would function when the pressure changed in the baggage compartment sufficiently to close the switch or allow the barometric switch to function and then actually detonate the bomb.
The use of an altitude-sensitive barometric switch told the FBI that they were dealing with a serious and smart bomber. Ronay began his
Not
inquiries
really.
with the Chicago police. He
That was a
looking for
L-ass
anything to
bomb, bro.
compare
What do
to
you
the
mean?
airline device.
L.
At Northwestern University, a thorough search uncovered the existence of two minor and seemingly unrelated incidents at the university. In addition to learning of the device that injured Terry Marker, Ronay learned of another. On May 9, 1979, another bomb had gone off at Northwestern University, seriously injuring graduate student John Harris. Its design was nearly identical to the first one. But since they were both relatively minor incidents, authorities at the time didn't connect the two. Dismissing those devices as amateurish pranks, the recovered debris was discarded. Working only from photographs, Chris Ronay concluded that all three bombs were the work of the same person.
There were construction techniques, the way the wood was cut, the way it was put together, the markings on the wood, the way the tape was applied, that is evident in the photographs, was the same as in the previous cases.
The pipe bombs, placed inside wooden boxes, were all made of ordinary components: screws and nails and smokeless powder and black tape.
The average Iraqi teenager that got radicalized and joined ISIS clears this man, okay? I'm just saying, like, it's like IEDs can take out effectively entire fucking convoys, okay? Blow an American 19-year-old's legs off because the American military originally were like, oh yeah, let's not put fucking any kind of shields underneath our Humvees, okay? Meanwhile, this motherfucker's over here making these wood bombs.
The components were homemade and sanded to render them.
Yeah, exactly. Why? Because they have teamwork. That's it. That's it. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, okay? The IRA, which is politically very different, obviously, shows you that teamwork makes the motherfucking dream work, dude. Yeah, we were putting sandbags in the floor of the Humvee.
Untraceable.
Certain components were not crafted as much as fondled and played with and looked at, and you could see they were handled and shaped and reshaped. And it just struck me that somebody spent an awful lot of time on this bomb enjoying putting it together.
The FBI realized they were dealing with a serial bomber, one that was passionate about his craft. In the 1950s, a shy, highly intelligent boy from suburban Illinois named Ted Kaczynski skipped a grade in elementary school.
Oh God, he was what are they called? Fuck, what is it like when you're like super smart when you're young? Gifted. He was a gifted kid. He was a fucking gifted kid, dude. Oh no, that explains so much more than that is more important than fucking MK Ultra in my opinion, okay? Typical.
He was an introvert, preferring to
Young
withdraw
Sheldon.
into his room to study, especially to study chemistry.
Sus.
He was a prodigy with genius-level intelligence. His IQ topped 170. He entered Harvard at 16 and graduated in 3 years in 1962. In 5 years, he had received his doctorate from the University of Michigan. As an assistant professor of mathematics at the University of California, Berkeley, Kaczynski was not a popular or outgoing professor. Practically no one got to know him. In 1969, he abruptly resigned. The social nature of his teaching position was too much for Ted. He just didn't seem to fit in. By 1971, Kaczynski had decided to drop out of society completely. He bought an acre and a half of land in a rural area just outside of Lincoln, Montana, 6,000 feet above the society he had come to despise.
Love this recreation.
He built a tiny 8 by 10 foot cabin with no electricity or running water.
Yeah. You know his ass ain't showering, brother. Oh my God, was he stinky. Oh my God, bro. He had to fucking, like, he had to live miles away, hundreds of miles away from other people because, god damn, if you came near his stinky ass cabin, dude, it would just break you permanently.
There he would sit by himself, reading and writing. One of the things Ted wrote was a 23-page essay raging against modern man's obsession with technological and scientific progress. Scientific research, he wrote, will inevitably result in the extinction of individual liberty. He sent a copy to his brother David. David read it and stuck it in a trunk where it sat for a quarter of a century. In June of 1978, Ted Kaczynski took a time out from his cabin to take a job working for his brother at a foam cutting plant in Illinois. Ted's bizarre behavior became too much. His brother was forced to fire him.
Ted, take it down.
Ted had insulted a female co-worker
His brother's a big time narc.
who had refused his advances. Ted seethed and within a year moved back to his cabin in Montana, vowing never to see his family again. Trying to fit in as a social being was too frustrating for the introverted genius. Ted withdrew even more, believing modern man incapable of understanding him.
The proto incel. Yeah. There were definitely incels before him. But I think, like, I mean, dude, there are so many posters. Like, you could say Karl Marx was like a OG poster, not an incel, but like there are so many that came before him, but like I totally understand why. I totally understand why a lot of people, especially on 4chan, look to him. Martin Luther was the OG poster. There's definitely even before.
He was starting to see civil society as an obstacle that needed to be overcome. In time, Ted became acclimated to his life with few luxuries. He took it.
Karl Marx literally was a Redditor. He lived in fucking filth, for the record. Karl Marx also was anti-shower and a hoarder and absolutely lived in filth. Like, the police that were surveilling him wrote about how insane his living conditions were and how awful his fucking how awful his living quarters were and how awful his sleep schedule was.
Took it upon himself to grow his own food and to be otherwise self-sufficient. He had few acquaintances, opting for his own company in the Montana wilds. Ted rarely made it into Lincoln. When he did, it was usually to bury his face in reference books in the small-town library.
Another red flag.
On May 3rd, 1980, Ted Kaczynski rode his homemade bike into Lincoln. He wasn't going to the library this time.
He was going to the Truth Prairie. This man made his own bike. That's wild. That's crazy. Okay. I don't know how you do that, but
Instead, he caught a bus for Helena and checked into the Helena Park Hotel for a brief stay. The next day, he headed west.
I think it's a disservice to like completely omit the ruthless MK Ultra style like CIA backed experimentation that he underwent. I'm just, but I don't really expect too much from this like this was made by the FBI. Yeah, there's a lot of FBI people in here, so I assume like in the documentary, so I assume this is just like pro cops. They did talk about like they're like he was brilliant. He evaded the police for 20 years. But the cops finally did it. They got him. It also might not have been known at the time that this was made, to be fair.
Ted had urgent business that needed tending to. Percy Wood, the president of United Airlines, received a parcel at his suburban Chicago home on June 10th, 1980. A few days earlier, he received a letter from a stranger promising to mail him a book which, the letter said, had tremendous social significance. Wood placed the package on his kitchen counter. He opened and retrieved a book, Ice Brothers by Sloan Wilson. Wood was puzzled. Why is this book socially significant? He opened the cover. Wood was nearly killed. The bomber had upped the ante considerably with his fourth and most...
Okay, I can get on board with that. Like, don't read because books can kill you. See, this wouldn't kill me because I would never read. You know what I mean? I'd be like, a book? Ew, I would throw it out.
Powerful device yet. FBI and ATF bomb technicians poured over the scene. It was quickly identified as the work of the serial bomber. Each bomb so far had been a pipe bomb with similar construction and wiring. On this, the fourth bomb, the bomber had left a calling card. Punched into a piece of rubble were the letters FC.
Certainly the initials FC were put in these bombs to be found, clearly protected in such
A footy fan. Yeah, fucking FC. Footy fan,
a
yeah.
way that they would survive the blasts. It didn't make any sense to have it in there. It didn't function in any way. It served no purpose except to say, here's my signature, here's an identifying feature.
The FBI could only speculate what FC meant. By this time, FBI investigators had already given him a name. He bombed universities and airlines. They called him UNABOMB, UN for university, and A for airline. Naming him was easy.
That's so stupid.
Finding him would be much, much more difficult. In 1981, with FC their best clue yet, the FBI cross-referenced thousands of people with those initials. But the Unabomber was not sitting idle. In October, a package was found sitting in a building at the University of Utah. It was a pipe bomb. Fortunately, it was a dud. Investigators now had a device intact. Perhaps a component was traceable. It would take time to find out. The Unabomber remained busy. In the spring of 1982, a package meant for Professor...
Bro, this guy sure seems like he sucks at doing bombs, dude. It's like the one thing. It's his motherfucking passion, and it took him... It sure feels like it took a long-ass time for him to make decent ones, dude.
Leroy Wood Berenson blew up instead in the hands of an academic assistant at Vanderbilt University. The bomb was made of the usual materials, with the initials FC on the surviving wreckage. Examiners spent endless hours studying every minute detail of the Unabomb devices. The most bizarre clue suddenly emerged. The last two people specifically targeted were named Wood.
Wood played such an important role in every one of the bombs. I mean, it was present in every one of the bombs, even when it didn't need to be. He, in fact, if he didn't have wood in it, he threw wood in it, sticks of wood, just so they'd be there. There were references to wood in addresses and names of people throughout.
FBI lab examiner Doug Diedrich of the Trace Evidence Unit is also a wood expert.
Well, the materials may indicate something about that individual, may indicate where he might live, what he might do for a living. And that's one of the things that I was involved with, especially.
No, man, he was jobless. Motherfucker, famously jobless. This is
trying
what
to
jobless motherfuckers do. So I guess Twitter is actually better, because then jobless motherfuckers can just sit on there and chirp all day about like dumb shit. You know what I mean? Instead of doing this, which is, significantly worse than just chirping about dumb shit as a Twitter Blue subscriber. You know what I mean?
Determine where these types of woods came from, what geographical area, what part of the country.
This approach seemed like a long shot, but the scarcity of clues left investigators with few options. As the FBI investigation intensified, so did the power of the Unabomber's devices. On July 2nd, 1982, Professor Diogenes Angelakos of the University of California, Berkeley, a devoted husband and a popular teacher, noticed a strange-looking object on the floor of the Computer Science Department's coffee room.
Brother, run away. Oh no, he got a Greek man. He got a Greek man.
The explosion seriously wounded him and tore off his fingers. As he lay dazed, he found a typewritten note. Woo, it works. I told you it would. RV.
Chat, it's not real gore.
The
It's a
FBI ran
dramatic
down everyone in America named Wu, and everyone with the initials RV, a monumental, labor-intensive task, but to no avail. The note was a ruse. Another lead surfaced the day following the blast. A custodian who worked in Corey Hall, the building where the bomb exploded, saw a man with a thin mustache and sweatshirt loitering in the hall the night before. The custodian, however, was unable to remember enough details to help a sketch artist make a composite. Angelakos was critically wounded, requiring a lengthy hospital stay. He was no longer able to care for his invalid wife. She died within a month of the blast.
That's how you know. That's how you fucking know this is old as fuck. He said invalid wife. God damn, brother.
In May of 1985, in that same building, Berkeley graduate student John Hauser, a captain in the Air Force, noticed on the floor a 3-ring binder sitting on top of another object. Hauser had just applied for astronaut training. What he didn't know as he lay wounded was that he had already been accepted into the program. But he would never fly again. His Air Force Academy ring was found embedded in the wall across the room. Ironically, Professor Angelakos was nearby when the bomb exploded. He rushed to help Hauser.
Bro, Professor Angelakos, I'd be suspicious of him. Because he's Greek, obviously. Motherfucker's always around, supposedly, when one of these things keeps blowing up.
Unabomber-related crime scene investigations conducted by the FBI, ATF, and the United States Postal Service had become frustratingly routine. The recovered bomb components were packaged and sent to the FBI lab for future comparisons. Over the next few years, there would be many such examinations. On May 8th...
You know Ted Kaczynski knows baklava is Turkish and not a Greek invention. Okay? I'm just saying. No, he knows that.
A package was received at the Boeing Corporation in Auburn, Washington. It was addressed only to the company, was heavy, and had too much postage.
Hey, Mark, look at this.
A suspicious mailroom employee called security. The package was x-rayed and shown to contain a pipe bomb. It had FC stamped into the end caps. Had the employee opened the package, it most likely would have killed him and anyone else nearby. On November 15th, 1985, Dr. James McConnell, a psychology professor at the University of Michigan, received a letter and package from a Ralph C. Kloppenberg. The sender described himself as a doctoral student. "I'd like you to read this book," he wrote. "Everyone in your position should read this book." As he read, his assistant opened the package nearby.
Uh-oh, not again. See? Anti-reading, dude. You just gotta... Here's how you could have saved yourself. Don't read. You see a book, you throw it in the trash immediately. You're like, no, not happening. Okay? Not for me. I'm good. I'm anti-reading and I'm anti-watching the top of the hour ad break. Okay? These are two very important principles for the HasanAbi heads out there. If you no longer want to see those ads at the top of the hour, if you want an uninterrupted broadcast experience, all you need to do is subscribe or get gifted a sub if you're lucky. Okay? Don't unpause the bomb is going to blow up. Yeah, well, you're going to see it unless you are not subscribed, in which case you'll see an ad, probably, an explosive ad. Here's the 3-minute ad break now.
The explosion seriously injured the assistant and blew out the hearing of Dr. McConnell. Examiners continued to dissect the bombs. They were evolving as the Unabomber refined his craft.
I'm going to pee. I'll be back.
Exhaustive lab tests showed they were getting more sophisticated and more powerful. Agents were frustrated. They were making little progress in determining the identity of the Unabomber. And their analysis was confirming what they already knew. If the packages kept coming, it would only be a matter of time before someone was killed. Hugh Scruton owned the Rentec computer store in Sacramento, California. On December 11, 1985, about lunchtime, Scruton headed out the back door that led to the rear parking lot when he noticed something. It looked like a block of wood with 4 nails sticking out, points up. The explosion was ferocious, blowing a massive gaping hole into Scruton's chest, exposing his heart. The Unabomber was now a murderer. The bomb that killed Hugh Scruton was the most powerful yet. It consisted of a pipe within a pipe and contained all of the same characteristics as the others, right down to the FC stamped on a surviving end cap. The Unabomber investigation was now officially a homicide case. Investigators stuck to their strategy of keeping the details of the case secret, lest the Unabomber learn what they knew, or worse, lest they encourage copycats. Agents were desperate for a solid lead. Ted Kaczynski was always active in his secluded cabin. When he wasn't making bombs, he was writing his philosophy that justified them. For Ted Kaczynski, technological society was a horror, defined by the Earth's destruction and human beings amounting to little more than mindless robots. In Ted's story, anyone who was participating in the human race's dependency on technology was a villain. On February 20th, 1987, a secretary at Cam's computer store in Salt Lake City looked out of her office window and caught a glimpse of a man in the parking lot, placing an object on the ground. An hour later, the store's owner, Gary Wright, was in the parking lot. He noticed the object on the ground. It was a block of wood with 4 nails sticking out, points up. Wright received serious injuries, but miraculously survived. As police scoured bus stations and local businesses looking for a suspect, a sketch was commissioned from the secretary's description. It was unquestionably the portrait of a man in disguise. The sketch didn't catch the Unabomber, but in one way it may have worked. Knowing he was seen, the Unabomber seemed to vanish. After 9 years of bombings, Unabomber-related incidents simply stopped after the 1987 Cams explosion. The investigation had continued, but all available leads had been exhausted. After 6 years of silence, investigators were hopeful that the Unabomber had either been imprisoned on some unrelated charge or died. Either way, the bombs had stopped.
I feel like I've educated this dog a little too well on waiting. Whenever I say wait, she just like doesn't move ever again, which is very odd. Very, very, very odd. I don't know why. I'm like, come on, go. I'm like, go. Okay, go. And then she won't. She literally just sitting there. How Harvard created the Unabomber? Yeah, we'll cover that part after this. I already have that ready. I just wanted an analysis of the situation. Okay. You need a teacher release word then? Malicious compliance. How does she do when being called? Hiya. I'll give her something else.
But Ted Kaczynski was neither dead nor in jail. He had spent the last 6 years virtually alone. Content in his day-to-day routine. Tending the garden, hunting, writing, and visiting the library. Ted always managed to stay on top of current events. In 1993, after a 6-year hiatus, several highly publicized events propelled the Unabomber out of retirement. The fiery siege at Waco, Texas, between the ATF and the Branch Davidian religious cult, and the bombing of the World Trade Center created a violent political environment. The Unabomber would return in a fit of violence of his own. Dr. Charles Epstein is a renowned geneticist at the University of San Francisco. On June 22, 1993, he sat down at his kitchen table to open his mail, including a padded envelope which had arrived that day. The blast critically injured Dr. Epstein. After 2.5 hours of surgery, he was stabilized and very lucky to be alive. Two days later, on June 24th, Dr. David Galernter, a prominent computer scientist at Yale University, arrived early at his office to open his mail.
Yeah, he bombed the wrong Epstein.
Injured in his right.
I can't take like these blasts seriously because the recreations are so comical, and he made so many of them. Like, it's just almost impossible for me to sit here and take this like as a devastating, you know, reactionary terrorist who's like trying to kill fucking grad students who definitely do not deserve it. But it is so cartoonish, the depiction of these explosions and the frequency of which it happens, that it's like you could put a supercut of it and it's always like, ah! And there was a unidentified item, and this grad student or this college professor touched it. Boom!
Arm, eye, and abdomen. Galernter struggled to his feet and went out the door for help. The FBI quickly determined that the Epstein bomb and the Galernter bomb were identical. Pipe bombs filled with potassium chlorate and aluminum powder. Both devices had been placed inside a handcrafted wooden box. A few hours after the Galernter bomb went off, a letter was received in the mailroom of the New York Times. It was from a self-proclaimed anarchist group called FC, who were claiming responsibility for the recent bombings. FC promised more communications in the future. An identifying number was provided to the Times to ensure the authenticity of future communications. It was 553-25-4394. The FBI determined that the number was a Social Security number of a 20-year-old parolee in Northern California, incredibly with a tattoo on his arm reading Pure Wood. An investigation quickly dismissed him as the Unabomber. Another major clue was discovered. Impressed into the paper on the New York Times letter was the faint notation, "Call Nathan R., Wednesday, 7 p.m." The elusive Unabomber finally provided agents with a solid lead.
What a dumbass.
The FBI talked to over 10,000 people whose first name was Nathan and whose last name began with R. The exhaustive search turned up nothing. It seemed the Unabomber loved sending the FBI on wild goose chases. The Times ran the letter, which sparked public interest. It also drew the FBI into dozens of false leads. Disgruntled students, aircraft engineers, even a Dungeons and Dragons club in Chicago. The latest round of activity.
Wait, so the Pure Wood tattoo thing and the convict identification number, like, how the fuck did he have access to that? Went on Twitch at the library, and it's the first time I've not seen you on the front page. Maybe I'm tripping. I don't know. Maybe you are tripping.
It sent the FBI investigation into overdrive. A UNABOMB task force consisting of FBI, ATF, and postal inspectors was formed to coordinate investigative efforts. Jim Freeman was the head of the FBI's San Francisco field office. He would also head the multi-agency UNABOMB task force.
We had evidence that was scattered around 3 different federal agencies and a lot of local state laboratories. So we recognized that our task was to gain control of the information that was already out there, determine what investigation had already been done. And we set about this by deciding to reinvestigate every UNABOMB crime.
Every shred of physical evidence that remained from past Unabomber devices would be given to one forensic examiner. Special Agent Tom Monell of the FBI Laboratory's Materials and Devices Unit became the chief examiner for the investigation.
All the evidence in the Unabomb case, no matter if it was explosive related or not, came through me and my unit. In a serial bombing type case such as the Unabomb case, the most frustrating aspect was the fact that we were doing all forensic examinations that could possibly be done to the evidence, and it wasn't able to lead us to any individual.
While the task force struggled, Kaczynski's warped revolution against society continued. On December 10th, 1994, advertising executive Thomas Moser was opening his mail in his North Caldwell, New Jersey home. His wife and 2 daughters were upstairs. He examined a small package with excessive postage from an H.C. Wickel, Department of Economics, San Francisco State University. The explosion was the most gruesome yet, instantly decapitating Thomas Moser. With every previous device in the Unabomber investigation, Agent Monell was able to reconstruct a replica, working only from the debris recovered from the various crime scenes. As with the 15 bombs he had reconstructed, this one was unquestionably the work of the Unabomber. A few months later, Ted Kaczynski prepared for an extended visit to the West Coast. This trip would be his busiest to date. On April 19, 1995, Ted Kaczynski was in the San Francisco Bay Area when Timothy McVeigh's 2,000-pound fuel oil bomb destroyed the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, killing 168 people. Ted would not let his agenda be eclipsed by the devastation in Oklahoma. The next day, April 20th, the nation still reeling over Oklahoma City, Kaczynski mailed 5 items, 4 letters, and a parcel. Within a few days, the mail arrived back east. First was a letter to the New York Times. FBI Special Agent Terry Turchie was second in command of the Unabomb task force.
In the letter to the New York Times, he mentioned that he was claiming responsibility for the attacks on Thomas Moser, Charles Epstein, and David Galerter. He also mentioned some of his goals and objectives and said that he was thinking of sending a manuscript or an essay, and that he wanted them to consider publishing that essay. And if they did, he would make an agreement to cease committing terrorist acts.
The second letter received was to recent victim David Galerter at Yale, still recovering from his April wounding. The letter was taunting. Dr. Galerter, people with advanced degrees are not as smart as they think they are. If you'd had any brains, you would have realized that there are a lot of people out there who resent bitterly the way techno-nerds like you are changing the world. On April 25th, 1995, a package arrived at the California Forestry Association addressed to its former president, William Dennison. Its current president, Gilbert Murray, decided to open it himself.
That's a federal crime.
It exploded.
That's a federal crime. You should not have done that. That's a federal crime. Don't open someone else's mail, okay? Classic, though.
With incredible violence, destroying everything in the office. Gil Murray was literally blown to pieces. 4 blocks away, the governor of California heard the blast from his office. The Unabomber scare was nationwide. Bomb threats were being reported everywhere. The FBI suspect list topped 50,000 names. 16 years and 16 bombs later, the Unabomber had claimed 3 lives and injured 24 people. 2 months after Murray was brutally killed,
Unabomber HasanAbi shitting on STEM Lord PhDs and shake emoji.
a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle. It read, "The terrorist group FC, called Unabomber by the FBI, is planning to blow up an airliner out of Los Angeles International Airport during the next 6 days."
The threat had to be taken absolutely seriously because the Unabomber had in fact placed a bomb aboard an aircraft before. It wasn't lethal enough to blow the plane out of the sky, but we knew that his bomb-making ability had progressed enough that he certainly was capable of that now.
The FBI saw to it that special security measures went into effect immediately at California airports. No one without a ticket was allowed through security. All bags were searched. Bomb-sniffing dogs checked everything. The Postal Service stopped flying the mail on commercial jets.
Passengers are questioned about carry-on luggage that they've had. Have you had this package in your custody and control during the entire time? Did you pack the suitcase yourself? Those type of questions all began from that day in LAX.
The same day that the airliner threat was received at the San Francisco Chronicle, the Washington Post received a message from FC, a 56-page typed manifesto. The New York Times received a carbon copy of the manifesto the next day, as did the adult magazine Penthouse 2 days after that. The letter to the Post and Times laid out the terms and conditions for publication and agreed to stop the bombings if the Post or the Times published. For Special Agent Terry Turchi and the Unabomber Task Force, receiving the manifesto was a huge break.
Of course, when the Unabomber manuscript came in, that was big information, and this was a major break, and we all knew that it was a major break, which if handled properly, could possibly lead us to identify the Unabomber.
The manuscript, blandly titled Industrial Society and Its Consequences, was a meticulously written tract against technology, genetics, leftism, conservatism, and modern society generally. The FBI had many items of evidence collected from years of investigating this case. They needed to generate just one solid lead, one that could hopefully break the case wide open. Freeman thought the answer lay in publishing the manifesto.
We very much were in favor of publishing it because after reading the manifesto, it was clear that someone had
I like that this gamble worked out, for the record, because his brother was like, "Oh shit, that's my brother," but I had to look it up. I'm sorry. This type of shit turns me into a Theodore fan. Anyway, what I was gonna say is the FBI's gamble worked, right? But it is kind of wild that they were like simultaneously worried about copycats. So they basically were like, let's publish his argument.
Put their philosophy that had evolved over a number of years within the pages of this thing. It was recognizable. Somebody in reading this, we hoped, would read it and say, I remember that guy. He was sat next to me in class at such and such a university.
After some public soul searching and discussions with the director of the FBI and Attorney General Janet Reno, the Washington Post, and the New York Times, the decision was made to publish the manifesto. The manifesto appeared in a special section of the Post on September 19, 1995. By early 1996, Ted Kaczynski.
The Unabomber tried to make a deal with the Penthouse to publish his manifesto in exchange for just one more bombing. What? Bob Guccione was prepared to publish him fully and without censorship. The FBI calls us Unabomb. You offer to publish our manuscript in the Penthouse in exchange for our promise to desist from terrorism, and that is what we're writing to you about. We have not made any phone calls, so you know communication from FC should be accepted as authentic. We are sending to the New York Times. That letter carries our identifying number cut out on your copy. We aren't in the habit of reading sex magazines ourselves, but we don't have anything against those who do read such magazines or those who publish them. However, it will obviously be to our advantage if we can get our stuff published in a respectable periodical rather than in Penthouse, because many people do consider sex magazines to be disreputable or worse. Moreover, if we're not mistaken, Penthouse is basically an entertainment magazine that contains also some serious commentary. In such magazines, the serious commentary, to some extent, serves as part of the entertainment. We are down on the entertainment industry because it is an opium of the masses. So we don't like the idea of playing footsie with that industry by allowing our writings to be used as entertainment. Therefore, if possible, we'd like to get our stuff published somewhere other than in Penthouse. He was so kind. Like the way he was writing. We are sending copies of our manuscript to the New York Times and the Washington Post. The New York Times is to have first claim on the right to publish a manuscript or to arrange for its publication elsewhere. Then the Washington Post. And after that, Penthouse. I like that it's like the New York Times, Washington Post, and then if it doesn't work out, Penthouse. If neither the New York Times nor the Washington Post has published the material or began to publish it in serial form or caused it to be published elsewhere or announced a definite date for its publication within 3 months from the day the present letter it's postmarked, then Penthouse can publish the material and will have exclusive rights to it for 6 months in accord with the conditions stated in our letters to the New York Times. But Penthouse must publish the material or publish the first installment, if it is to be serialized, within 2 months after the expiration of the 3-month period we just mentioned, and publication of the entire manuscript must be completed within about 6 months after the first installment appears. Do not skip. Are you crazy? I can't read that whole thing, dude. I am literally anti-reading, brother.
His brother David had been doing some soul searching of his own. The news.
These guys nowadays, like guys that have attitudes like this one, basically are doing like, First Amendment auditor type shit on YouTube instead. Again, Industrial Revolution W. Okay? They're just doing busy work where they've basically created YouTube channels where they go up to cops and stuff and then tell them that they have no authority over them and film them with their phone cameras. So it turns out probably much better for society overall. They get to make entertaining content that we can look at and watch and laugh at while also simultaneously not murder random people.
Reports that the Unabomber had connections to Chicago, their boyhood home, as well as to Berkeley and Salt Lake City, nagged at him. He got a copy of the Manifesto and began reading. He read it in the hopes of erasing the idea that his brother was a killer. What he read sent chills down his spine. He recognized the language and content of the Manifesto as being similar to that of writings by his brother Ted. David dug up as many old letters and writings of Ted's as he could find and compared them to the Unabomber Manifesto. Both had employed the unique phrase, cool-headed logician. David was distressed, but not yet convinced. He wrote Ted an urgent letter. Though he did not reveal his suspicions, he requested a visit to Montana. Ted refused his brother's request. David decided to call a private investigator to look into the matter.
W snitch.
But the news that the private eye brought him was not encouraging. The private eye submitted the manifesto along with some of Ted's writing to be analyzed by experts who didn't know the parties involved. The experts concluded that the authors had a strong chance of being the same person. Frantically, David continued his search for anything Ted had ever written to him. In an old trunk, he came across the essay Ted had sent him back in 1971. David could no longer hide from the reality that his brother might be the Unabomber.
W snitch, dude.
David
Actually,
Kaczynski
good
was
snitch.
stunned. The 1971 essay David had unearthed was eerily similar to the Unabomber Manifesto. Torn by the prospect of...
I keep expecting these letters to explode. Same, brother. Anytime one of these anytime somebody opens a letter, I expect a comical explosion to take place. Where the guy goes, ah!
of turning in his own brother on the one hand and endangering lives on the other. David Kaczynski made a gut-wrenching decision. Through his attorney, he contacted the FBI about his brother. In February of 1996, David Kaczynski told task force members of his suspicions. He gave a detailed accounting of Ted's life, where he grew up, where he went to school, and where he now lived. He then turned over the 1971 essay.
And then we were able to do a side-by-side comparison between that document that was prepared many years before to the current copy of the manifesto, and it was very clear to us, many of us in the task force, that the similarities were more than coincidental.
The FBI analyzed the essay and found over 160 examples of similarities with the Unabomber Manifesto, including common phrases and misspellings. The list went on and on. After 17 years, the FBI had its first major suspect, Ted Kaczynski. Dozens of FBI agents quietly slipped into the small town of Lincoln, Montana. The FBI kept careful surveillance on Kaczynski's cabin as they laid out the case for a search warrant, hoping that the Unabomber would not strike again in the interim. By the beginning of April, enough information had been uncovered to justify the warrant. Among other things, agents were able to learn that Ted had traveled extensively. Hotel records showed that he was always on the move immediately preceding a Unabomber event. Agent Terry Turchi submitted a meticulous 65-page affidavit outlining the government's case against Ted Kaczynski and requesting permission to search his cabin.
We had been working all morning since about 5 that morning to pre-position various agent teams in different locations in the woods in Lincoln, Montana, and at a forward command post that we had established in Lincoln. Everybody had a different role. We had also had the evidence response teams coming in, and they were staging at another command post that we had in Lincoln. So everyone was ready to go once the warrant was signed.
Disguised FBI agents and a forest officer approached Kaczynski's cabin. They walked toward his cabin speaking loudly. They didn't want Kaczynski to suspect.
I like the idea that ultimately what happened was not the FBI's like brilliant investigative capabilities, but instead a shot in the dark and possibly like quite problematic decision to release the manifesto, which led to the brother snitching on him. Like, they got so fucking lucky, it's crazy. And also, this entire documentary is supposed to, like, show this as, like, a positive thing, but they literally did very little. Especially when you consider that the Penthouse magazine would have published the manifesto, inevitably. It makes it even funnier.
There was anybody sneaking up on him. The officers asked him to help identify a property line on their map. As he turned to get his coat, the officers pounced on Kaczynski. The suspected Unabomber was in custody.
L nerd.
Kaczynski was immediately taken for questioning to a temporary forward command post. Jim Freeman was about to come face to face with the man that had eluded the FBI
smelled like
for
spoiled
nearly 2
milk?
decades.
He looked just absolutely disheveled. He looked like he was covered with soot. The agents that had grabbed his arms to restrain him had soot on their hands.
So, Ted, you like to travel?
Kaczynski admitted nothing and refused to say whether the cabin had any live bombs
How about
in
Helen?
it.
Been down there much?
As the questioning continued, the search of the cabin began. The tiny cabin was treated essentially like a live bomb. It was assumed that the place at the very least had live bombs in it, or at worst, was heavily booby-trapped. Explosive ordnance disposal teams cautiously made their way into the cabin.
Not putting a bomb in your cabin as a bomber
Ted
is pretty
Kaczynski
big.
had
That's
not
a big
been
L
formally
too.
arrested on any charges yet. As investigators searched through his cabin, they found enough evidence to charge him with possession of bomb-making materials. They found pipes, chemicals, wiring, batteries, and wooden boxes. This charge would allow agents to hold Kaczynski until a more thorough search could be conducted. FBI Special Agent and explosive expert Donald Sockleben was responsible for quickly gathering evidence in order to obtain the arrest warrant. He rushed to Helena to petition the judge. Sockleben had been working on the Unabomb case for years.
I think it was on the ride back to Helena that night when Pat Webb and I, who had worked on this for so many years, just sort of looked at each other and realized that maybe this was the beginning of the end, that we really did believe that night, if we hadn't believed before, that we had in fact caught the Unabomber.
Ted Kaczynski was detained overnight until formal arrest charges could be brought the following morning. He was led through the streets on national television, looking every bit the part of an eccentric hermit. He was presented the next day before a judge in Helena on a charge of possession of bomb-making equipment. The search of the cabin continued. The room was a gold mine, but a dangerous one. Each container, each book, each binder needed to be x-rayed for explosive devices. It was clearly going to take a long time to search the tiny cabin. The evidence being slowly hauled out of the cabin was damning. A series of 3-ring binders with page after page of detailed bomb designs which matched the bombs used in many of the Unabomb explosions. Explosive powders of the type used in the bombings. Aluminum ingots and aluminum shavings on the floor, crucial bomb components. There was the infamous hooded sweatshirt and sunglasses. Agent Thomas Monell, the expert on Unabomb devices, was also inside the cabin.
The other evidence located in the cabin were electrical components and wire that were consistent with the majority of the Unabomb devices. We found a improvised or a homemade flip type switch that was literally identical to 3 switches that were used in earlier bombs.
After almost 2 full days, the search came to a sudden stop. A package was found. It was wrapped like previous bombs with a return address on it. All it awaited was a victim's name and address for the front. It was x-rayed and determined to be a live pipe bomb. Special Agent Socklaven had to handle the crisis.
Well,
this motherfucker was sleeping with a live pipe bomb under his bed, by the way. Which is wild to think about because it's like I guess he just knew that his shit was so ass it would never explode.
From the x-ray, it looked very similar to the last bomb that had been placed, the one that killed Mr. Murray in Sacramento. We were able to safely remove the box from the cabin and take it down the hill to where we set up a site to deal with the bomb.
The search slowly continued in the days ahead, and more damning evidence was seized. In addition to bomb-making paraphernalia and chemicals, agents also seized letters, notes, diagrams, and the Unabomber Manifesto. One irrefutable link between Ted Kaczynski and the Unabomber remained: the typewriter used for the manifesto.
The typewriter that had been used to type the manifesto wasn't found until literally the last day of the search, which took
Technology L, by the way, using a typewriter, I mean.
4 or 5 days. It was literally in the bottom of the last box that was opened.
It had taken 11 days to search an 80-square-foot room, but the FBI's careful approach had paid off. The man who had killed, maimed, and ruined lives, all the while taunting the FBI, was caught stone cold. On April 14th, the entire cabin was hoisted onto a flatbed and hauled away for further examination. The charges against Kaczynski had been upgraded. On June 18, 1996, Ted Kaczynski was indicted in Sacramento on 10 counts relating to Unabomber activities. 1 charge in the death of Hugh Scruton, 3 charges in the wounding of Charles Epstein, 3 charges in the maiming of David Galerter.
I just don't know how many people were using typewriters to communicate at that point, and I feel like it should have been like easier to figure out or pinpoint down or whittle away at possible suspects, because like the type of ink being used, you know what I mean? Or maybe like the keystrokes that would give away whichever type of typewriter it was. Figure out like who was. Buddy, home computers weren't until the 90s. First of all, I know. I understand that. My grandfather had a typewriter. So you watch too much CSI? But isn't there like details off of I don't know, like details that give away like what kind of typewriter it is, what kind of ink it is, like what kind of spacing is on the typewriter, you know what I mean? I'm sure.
And 3 charges in the death of Gil Murray. That day would have been Gil Murray's 48th birthday. New Jersey authorities filed more charges for the death of Thomas Moser. On November 12, 1996, selected visitors filed into a Sacramento courtroom for the long-awaited trial of Ted Kaczynski. In the front row was Ted's family, brother David, and his mother, Wanda Kaczynski. As Ted entered the courtroom, he turned his back angrily on his family members and never acknowledged them. Opening statements were about to begin when Kaczynski stood up and said he wanted to change lawyers. After a few days, the judge ruled that Kaczynski would have to undergo psychological testing. Federal prison psychiatrist Dr. Sally Johnson spent many days with Kaczynski. She concluded that Ted Kaczynski was mentally ill, but was competent to stand trial. The government's case against Kaczynski was overwhelming. For 17 years, the FBI had prepared for this day.
It's like we both think you're mentally ill and you're but still competent to stand trial.
Examiners had reconstructed and preserved every device related to the Unabomber's crimes. With Ted Kaczynski's arrest, they were now able to establish an irrefutable link between him and the Unabomber. Ted's desire for solitude would no longer be self-imposed. With no options, he pled guilty to all Unabomber-related crimes. He was given 4 life sentences plus 30 years. He would never be eligible for parole. For Agent Terry Turchi, the Unabomber investigation shows the FBI's determination to never quit until justice is served, no matter how long it takes.
For the people committing these crimes, who may go on for many years and not get caught, they may become more arrogant, or they may become more complacent, or they may think we're never going to catch them. But I think for them and for the public, the message has to be that we don't give up and that we're going to stay with it until we solve it. And certainly I think that is what we're called upon to do and what we need to do.
In June 1998, Joanna Lee, an assistant editor at Simon & Schuster Publishing, received a letter from Ted Kaczynski with a prison return address. She knew he was the convicted Unabomber, but opened it anyway.
Well, I mean, it's from prison.
Kaczynski wanted them to publish a book about his struggle. To this date, there are no takers.
He did not fucking say my struggle. Bro, that's from prison? Who else did that, I wonder? Writing a book about his struggle from... Huh. Interesting. You've heard mine bomb? Oh God, that's so stupid. You're so dumb for that joke. This was the FBI files. And then here's how Harvard created the Unabomber.
Participate in a psychological study on your university campus. It's run by an esteemed professor. You'll earn some pocket change, and as a side bonus, perhaps contribute to the greater scientific knowledge of humanity. But the next thing you know, you have electrodes strapping you to machines and a camera recording you.
Like, I think he was already a weirdo, and this just basically tweaked his mind in all the right ways. Like, you know how the FBI will, like, purposely find, like, random fucking teenagers and shit? And, like, tell them all the best ways to, like, coerce them into doing an act of terror, only to just, like, arrest them subsequently, put them in perma-jail to say, hey, we did it again, boys. We caught another terrorist in the act. And it's like, I feel like so many things, he was geared to be the perfect guy to do this. And then the MKUltra experiments basically fucking broke him.
As a lawyer, berates and belittles every belief and value you hold dear. Today, on Nutty History, we're putting a magnifying glass on the Harvard experiments, the mysterious and unethical series of experiments conducted on unwitting students from 1959 to 1962. The year was 1959. The setting was Harvard Yard. I'm sorry, I had to do an accent once. 22 Harvard students were asked, or possibly pressured, to participate in a vague series of psychological experiments that would contribute to the solution of certain psychological problems. You don't have to be a Harvard grad to know that that description is kind of sketchy. The subjects were paid for their time, typically 2 hours a week. For step 1 of the experiment, they were instructed to write an essay about their life philosophy and were told that they would be debating it with another student. Instead, they were straight up duped. These human guinea pigs were led into a brightly lit room, seated facing a one-way mirror. Through a hole in the wall, a camera was recording everything. Electrodes were attached to their bodies to measure their heart and respiratory rates. The students were then instructed to defend their personal life philosophy. But instead of being met with the promised discussion with a peer, they were interrogated by a lawyer.
I'm not gonna lie. This would break any man. Like, this would break any fucking man. You don't even need to be like kind of a weirdo to be absolutely brain broken. He got literally debate lorded, dude. He got debate lorded into terrorism, which of course, once again, proves the point I make regularly, which is debate perverts are the biggest burden on society. It's not the Industrial Revolutions and its consequences on mankind. It's debate pervertry and its consequences on mankind.
An older and more experienced opponent whose aim was to humiliate and completely desecrate all of the students' most core beliefs. The interrogator prepared for each student by studying their essays, learning about their hopes and dreams with the aim of causing them to question everything they thought that they knew. The subjected students, who were given code names, described their helplessness during the experience as the verbal abuse continued. While 2 hours might not seem like the end of the world, over the course of 3 years, each student spent an average of 200 hours in a chair, which one student, codenamed Kringle, compared to being strapped into an electric chair. After interrogation, students were forced to watch themselves be berated, reliving the embarrassing ordeal all over again. So what the hell was the point of all of this? And who gave the okay on psychologically traumatizing the school's own students for 3 years? The Harvard experiments were led by Henry Murray, a respected psychology professor whose contributions to the field can still be found in modern-day psychological assessments. Like many of the greats, though, Murray's career wasn't squeaky clean, ethically speaking. By his own words, Murray called the interrogative attacks on the Harvard experiments vehement, sweeping, and personally abusive. So it certainly wasn't a case of good intentions gone wrong. The goals of these experiments weren't and aren't entirely.
That's a really good point. This is basically what Steven Crowder does on a regular basis. The Change My Mind segments. And Ben Shapiro does this too. Ben Shapiro is literally a lawyer. Ben Shapiro looked at how the Unabomber was created and was like, hypothetically, what if I was the one who did the exact same thing to unsuspecting college freshmen?
Entirely known, and it seemed Murray often deviated from an exact scientific method. One of his graduate students' assistants described him as not the most systemic scientist, and the professor himself often gave varying answers, at times suggesting his data had no value at all. Cool. Well, that's a good reason to emotionally scar a bunch of developing minds. There's other experience from Murray's background, however, that suggests he wasn't conducting these experiments just for kicks. In World War II, he was part of an Office of Strategic Services, later known as the CIA.
Oh, OSS guy, huh? Interesting. Surely this had nothing to do with MK Ultra.
Where he helped assess agents and collaborated on a psychological profile of Hitler. The profile report specifically mentioned that Hitler would commit suicide if defeat was near. How about them apples? He also monitored military experiments on brainwashing. Get your tinfoil hats ready. A popular theory is that Murray's ties with the CIA continued post-World War II and into the Cold War. During this time, the CIA was focused on interrogation training and techniques, how to ensure their own men would stand up to interrogation, and how to effectively break enemy prisoners. This involved tests and experiments designed to psychologically break down the subject. Sound familiar? Much of this testing was encompassed under the notorious Project MK Ultra, which would use many.
Why is he saying get your tinfoil hats ready? Why is he saying get your tinfoil hats ready and then like talking about declassified information that is like literally I don't know, just openly discussed. It's not like it's hidden. Like it's just It's just like factual history.
Many unknowing participants to test the use of drugs and procedures in interrogations for potential mind control. Some allege that the Harvard experiments were actually part of MKUltra, which did utilize a variety of other institutions to secretly conduct its operations. Also adding fuel to the fire, MKUltra drugged many of its subjects with LSD without their consent, for your information, thinking that bad acid trips were the key to controlling someone's mind. Henry Murray, funnily enough, also had an interest in psychedelics. Right around the same time period, he supervised and supported a young Harvard researcher by the name of Timothy Leary in a study of hallucinogens. According to our data, that's one coincidence too many. It's impossible to tell what lasting impact the Harvard experiments may have had on its subjects, but one went on to make history in a way that didn't exactly earn himself a spot in the Alumni Hall of Fame. Ted Kaczynski, aka the Unabomber, terrorized the nation with a bombing campaign.
Okay, for the record, as far as Harvard alumni goes, Ted Kaczynski doesn't crack the top 100 most murderous alumni, okay? Like, you got presidents that have gone there, all right? You got, like, Secretary of States that have gone to Harvard. Get the fuck out of here. Motherfucker killed, like, 3 people and maimed, like, 16, okay? Those are actual rookie numbers for Harvard. It doesn't even crack. I'm willing to bet that it does not even fucking crack the top 1,000, I would say. As far as like Harvard's most prestigious alumni, oh my lord.
Campaign for 17 years that killed 3 people and injured 23 more. Kaczynski at the time was living as a recluse in a cabin in the woods and used the bombs as a twisted way to draw attention to his anti-technology beliefs, which aren't actually so crazy compared to the methods he used to advertise them. But before the rap sheet, Ted was a young Harvard student enrolling in the Ivy League school on a scholarship at just 16 years old. Kaczynski was a mathematical whiz who was also unlucky enough to be, according to him, pressured.
Yeah, Zuckerberg didn't even graduate Harvard, and he still got a fucking genocide in Myanmar under his belt that he, like, you know, played a formative role in facilitation.
Into partaking in Murray's experiments. Many believe that Murray's humiliating and traumatic experience, which Kaczynski called the worst experience of his life, were instrumental in shaping Ted into a very talented serial killer. As a younger and less mature student, he may have been more susceptible to manipulation and taken a harder hit, psychologically speaking. Others theorize that the ordeal made him increasingly isolated from Harvard society and led to a hatred of technology and psychology that later turned murderous. Prior to undergoing the Harvard experiments, Ted was described by a Harvard health scientist doctor as exceedingly stable. Well, here's some crows you can eat, doc. Although the methods of Murray's Harvard experiments seem stunningly unethical by today's standards, at the time they didn't really go against any research code of conduct. It wasn't until a whole bunch of other disturbing experiments occurred that the American Psychological Association instituted in-depth guidelines on research ethics and a review board. You know, disturbing experiments like the one where participants were made to believe that they had fatally electrocuted other participants. But that's another video for another day. Let us know in the comments what other deranged debacles from history you
I feel like they could have done a deeper dive into the CIA MKUltra stuff. A young Harvard student took part in an experiment that turned the participants into wet pieces of bread doomed to defend billionaires till they die from a fatally gay Bud Light commercial. That student's name, Ben Shapiro. Please pray for him.